I mean, the piece, incidentally, is called Rivers to the Sea. That's the title of the piece. And although the sea is a kind of metaphorical, I think of it more as a metaphorical backdrop to the piece. It's not really about the sea as such, but it's more about musical currents going into this kind of vast, immense space, I suppose. New York poet Sarah Teasdale, it's partly based on an anthology of poems by her called Rivers to the Sea, which features some beautiful poems about New York, about Manhattan. So that's another kind of link into the city. I think it is such a unique place, New York. I mean, I certainly don't know any other city like it. I think partly the kind of the diversity in the city, the different nationalities, different cultures, but there's a kind of, it's indescribable really, a kind of vibe about the city which is completely different from London, different from Paris, different from other American cities, I find, which is quite intoxicating. And my, not solution, but my kind of way forward was to kind of what I describe as cross-cutting. So you have a specific type of texture which then is halted, and then you go into another type of music. So you're kind of, it's rather like a camera kind of suddenly changing shot to something else, and then suddenly zooming into a different landscape or sequence altogether. And then you resume what was going on before.
So these are some graphic sketches I've been making. This probably corresponding to the third movement, this the fourth, which is the more the Manhattan idea. Other little jottings when I've been walking around the city, just scribbling little notes down. Again, lots of graphic notation. And then from this, the ideas have, in certain cases, translated over into actual notes. These are kind of little fragments which I want to try to recall so that I can expand them and develop them later on.
So I'm now at the stage where I've got the short score, as it were, the piano score is getting to be fairly complete, but it's quite a lot of scoring still needs to be done. Each movement I've tried to make completely different. That's one of the challenges with this piece. I've wanted to achieve a completely different sound in each. So the first is a kind of unfolding, I suppose is the best word for it, and an unfolding of the orchestra. Again, I've subtitled it The Midnight Rose, which is a rather enigmatic title, but the idea of it is a nightscape, but the idea of something blossoming in the night, using, you know, quite exotic colours in the orchestra, quite a soft harmonic palette actually. It's kind of fourths actually. That's one of the harmonic aspects of it. So that's the first movement, and that'll gain in intensity as it goes on. The second movement is completely different, is much more pulse-driven. Again, it's a kind of nightscape of kind of what I imagine is going to be the close, may not be precisely this rhythm, but this kind of ticking, insistent ticking, which is going to underpin the orchestration at that point. And then these, I'm thinking of probably pizzicato, this kind of thing. But it gets quite kind of manic as it goes on, so it erupts into this quite violent ending, but it's much more agitated. So the first, if you like, the first section of the piece, the first two movements, the first block of music will end in a pretty loud way. There's then an interlude, which I can play you, which is based on an interlude from a piece for string quartet and soprano I wrote several years ago called Canticle of the Rose. It's based on the same harmony, and I kind of see the interlude as I suppose, a kind of palate cleanser, if you like, between the second movement and the third movement. Again, the third movement starts in a very dark way. This is, I hope it's quite a kind of glowing, very simple glowing sound. So you've got this going on, clarinet then comes in, and the third and final solo. it will conclude. I've yet to write the conclusion. It'll only be 3 minutes of music, roughly. So that's the interlude, and then it goes into the third movement, and then finally the New York at the end. It's the kind of lights of New York which I'm wanting to conjure up at the beginning of the fourth movement. So there's a transition from the third movement into the fourth, and I'll just play you a tiny bit of this. The third movement's been, as I said, is a kind of introverted sound, and then you get this, which is a long sequence. Carries on. And so on. There's more counterpoint around it, but it kind of, again, that's to me a kind of river music, which leads in eventually to what I perceive as the kind of lights, which is basically a major chord with a few added notes. This is very high strings with Glock and probably piccolos as well. This chord. And then this kind of figuration in the woodwind. This kind of thing, which then gets louder and louder. In fact, I've got the graphic sketches I can show you, which shows you these fragments going cascading down. So it gets, eventually it's very loud brass kind of punctuating, and then you go into the main movement. So this is like a kind of prelude, if you like, to this cross-cutting idea I was describing earlier, and then it really gets very fast. So it's a prestissimo ending. If you like. I've called the last movement Neon with Sunrise. So it's a kind of nightscape, but at the end it ends up with this dawn, I suppose, dawnscape, this kind of very intense sunlight as I picture it in the piece. There comes a stage where you have to kind of go with what the music wants to do, having to make decisions, irreversible decisions in a sense at this point. But it's exciting because, you know, you really feel it is the piece, this is it.